This is the car that could have Tesla looking over its shoulder in Australia. It's the BYD Sealion 7, an all-electric SUV that has the Model Y Juniper firmly in its sights. But there is one big difference. It's not just cheaper than the Tesla, it's a lot cheaper. And BYD hasn't exactly scrimped on spec. So is this the car that can finally topple Tesla off the top of Australia's EV charts? Stick around as we put it to the test.
The Sealion 7 will be offered in two trim levels, the Premium at $54,990 and the Performance at $63,990, both before on-road costs. Now that pricing significantly undercuts its key competitor, the soon-to-launch Tesla Model Y Juniper, which also arrives in two trim levels and lists at $63,400 for the rear-wheel drive or $73,400 for the long-range all-wheel drive. Now, it should also be pointed out, though, that while the Tesla Model Y will be target number one, the Sealion 7 also launches into an increasingly congested and more competitively priced mid-size electric SUV segment, where it'll meet models like the Xpeng G6, the deep-out SO7, and the cheap and cheerful Leap Motor C10. Now, both BYD models are pretty generously equipped, with the Premium scoring 19-inch alloys, LED lighting, a panoramic glass roof, and a powered boot. Inside, there are leather seats which are heated and ventilated up front, a leather steering wheel and dual zone climate. Finally, the tech includes a 15.6-inch rotating central touchscreen with Apple CarPlay and Android Auto, a 12-speaker stereo, a 10.25-inch driver display and a head-up display, as well as wireless device charging. The Performance then adds 20-inch alloys, a heated steering wheel and heating for the rear seats. Now, both models also have V2L or vehicle to load, which is one of those things that I'm not sure people are really taking advantage of, and they really should, because if you think of the Sealion 7 as a very big mobile battery, it's this connection that allows you to use that power whenever you want and for whatever you want.
It looks, well, pretty sharp, right? Even if it doesn't totally push the boundaries of EV design, but I do think it looks fairly sleek, fairly purposeful and fairly premium. And I do really like these big 20-inch alloys on the Performance model. But interestingly, it also doesn't look all that big, and yet inside, it definitely feels it. But more on that in just a second. Now remember, BYD reckons this car can compete with like the German mainstay premium brands rather than just the mainstream models. And they're basing that on the fit, the finish and the material choices in here. And I gotta say, it does feel like quite a nice and premium space. I love the recessed screen for the driver. I love the second option of a head-up display. The more information I can get in front of me as a driver, the better. And I do love this big rotating central screen, which is super fast and seems relatively easy to use, although we haven't explored through its features too much. One kind of cool thing though is we're always complaining about a lack of aircon shortcut keys, and this one's got a clever function. So if you use 3 fingers and pull down, you can automatically change the air temperature, and then 3 fingers pulling across to the left or right changes the fan up or down. However, it's 45 degrees here in Adelaide, and that screen is hotter than a frying pan at the moment, so that's one downside of having to touch it to do things.
The Sealion 7 is just over 4.8 metres in length, 1.9 metres in width and 1.6 metres in height, and it rides on a near 3 metre wheelbase. Now, remember when I mentioned the space inside? There is a lot of it.
Now, the real party trick of this Sealion 7 is not one you're really going to get to enjoy from the driver's seat, unfortunately. It's all about the passengers. As you can see, there is oodles, and I mean oodles of room back here. It's got a nice flat floor, which means there's plenty of space to kind of spread out. You can even have a passenger in the middle fairly comfortably, but I'm sitting behind my own 175 centimetre driving position, and as you can see, there's miles of knee room. I've got enough headroom, and thankfully, on a day like today, the glass roof has a nice thick cover as well. Now, elsewhere back here, you'll find 2 cup holders hidden in the pull-down divider. There's USB-C charge ports as well as USB-A. There's seat heating for rear seat passengers. Again, not something we're going to be using today. Up front, they're heated and ventilated. And you've got vents here, but no way to control your own temperature. Step around to the back and open the boot, which you can do at the push of a button, of course, and you will find a very usable 500 litres of flat floor storage here. And because the floor can be adjusted by height, you can kind of choose where you want it for bulkier items as well. There's a second smaller storage space in the front as well.
The Premium model gets a single rear-mounted electric motor producing 230 kilowatts and 380 newton meters, which is sent straight to the rear tyres. BYD reckons the sprint to 100 kilometers an hour takes 6.7 seconds.
But this is the Performance model, which adds a second electric motor up front for a total 390 kilowatts and 690 newton meters, and that means a sprint to 100 kilometers an hour of 4.5 seconds.
Both models feature 150 kilowatt DC fast charging and up to 11 kilowatt AC charging, though BYD is yet to confirm the charging times for either. And the Premium will travel a claimed 482 kilometres between charges on the WLTP cycle. The Performance, with its extra grunt, will cover less distance, with the range dropping to a claimed 456 kilometres.
It is hotter than the surface of the sun here in Adelaide at the moment. In fact, my temperature gauge on the car is calling out 46 degrees Celsius. So let me tell you, I'm very happy to be back in the car rather than recording stuff outside it. Now, one thing I've noticed straight away is that the aircon in this car actually isn't stellar, but very hard to judge a car when the temperature is reaching almost 50 degrees. It is so far keeping me alive, which I guess is all you can really ask for in these conditions. And while this hasn't been the most comprehensive of drive programs so far, I can at least give you my first impressions on the BYD Sealion 7. First things first, immediately when you get in, it does actually feel like a solid, well screwed together and pretty premium feeling car. We actually took a wrong turn on the drive program here, and the ride, which is comfortable on tarmac, even fairly rough and broken tarmac, was even comfortable going along a very bumpy, very gritty dirt road, which a car like this would probably never go down. But it was a nice way to accidentally put the ride of this car to the test, and I gotta say, it did really impress. It was far more comfortable on that stuff than I was expecting, which bodes well for Sydney's typically fairly rough road surfaces, which is where I live. The power is typically smooth and instantaneous, and in this performance model, the dual motor model, there is more than enough of it. In fact, more than you'd likely ever really need. But the other thing I found quite surprising is that while these are some pretty tight and twisting corners, and we're not screaming around them supercar spec, we're also not dawdling, and this all-wheel drive is serving up plenty of grip, and there isn't that much in the way of body roll either, but you've probably heard the tyres complaining a little bit there. There is just no escaping the fact that this is a 2.5 tonne SUV. That weight can't just magically disappear. So when you're really pushing it, it can feel quite heavy. But again, I pose you the question I pose often with electric cars. Who's really going to be pushing this up an Alpine Pass? If this is just your usual city commuter, I can tell you it does all that stuff really comfortably and really easily. I have discovered a couple of little things about the car already, even on this, albeit fairly short drive experience. The first is that there's so much power on board this performance, 690 Newton meters, that if you so much breathe on the accelerator, you find yourself surging forward. So you do have to be a little bit careful with city speeds, especially in a city as festooned with speed cameras as Adelaide is. The other weird and actually potentially quite dangerous quirk is when you do put your foot down to test that acceleration, and there is plenty of it, when you lift off, the acceleration doesn't stop immediately. It feels like it's carrying forward just for a beat or two, but this thing collects speed so rapidly that beat or two can move you a fair way down the road. So that's definitely something you have to be aware of. But I guess the biggest tell from this drive experience for me is, given the nature of this vehicle and given the fact that the premium model is no slouch, I'm just not sure that I would spring for the performance. It doesn't have the dynamics to really justify the power, especially on the tight and twisty stuff. And the performance is more than quick enough for everyday driving, and it's cheaper, plus you get more range. So I think, or at least I suspect, that one's going to be the pick of the bunch. So at slow speeds, the steering can feel a little bit vague, I suppose. It takes a moment or two to turn in, but that also just kind of lends itself to the comfortable, cruisy nature of a vehicle like this. It's not razor sharp. But if you've ever driven a razor-sharp electric SUV, and there's one very popular one in Australia, that can actually grate on you after a while. It becomes a bit annoying. This one just feels a little bit easier to live with, at least on first impressions.
It's yet to receive an official ANCAP rating, but the Sealion 7 safety kit is all present and accounted for, with its 9 airbags joined by a more high-tech offering that includes things like adaptive cruise, lane keep assist, front and rear AEB and blind spot detection. And I can happily tell you that while we haven't put it through all that much work just yet, none of those safety systems were overly intrusive on our relatively brief test drive. Now, BYD offers a fairly complicated 6-year, 150,000 kilometre warranty, so do check what is and isn't covered and for how long. The battery is covered for 8 years or 160,000 kilometres, and servicing is required every 12 months or 20,000 Ks. Now, there's also a cap price servicing program which covers 10 years of ownership. BYD's website has all the details for every service, but the most expensive will be $1,109, while the cheapest is $246, with most falling somewhere between those two numbers.
Okay, so disclosure time. This hasn't been our most comprehensive test. It just hasn't been the time on this launch program. But on first impressions, it does feel like a really solid offering in the segment, and the price is certainly right too, even if it's maybe not quite as revolutionary as BYD might have you believe. But how will it survive on a grueling, comprehensive CarsGuide test? Unfortunately for that, you're just going to have to wait and see. Now remember, to read my full review on this car and on the Tesla and on every other EV you might be considering, check out carsguide.com.au.